Hi, and welcome to the Week 5 tutorial summary. The idea of these summaries is just to present you with an overview of the key points that we want to get across in the tutorials, but without including the student discussion. Very difficult to record tutorials in a classroom because unless every student has a microphone, the Zoom recording doesn't pick up much of the discussion, and a lot of the time in the tutorial is spent in class discussion in groups and then sharing with the class. So these are the key points. Second half of the tutorial summary is related to a case which we've provided. So before we get to that section, I suggest you pause this recording and reread the case before we discuss the suggested solutions to it. So the lectures in weeks 4 and 5 are introducing you to exploratory research, which primarily involve qualitative research methods. And in market research, qualitative research is particularly valuable in helping us to understand the nature of the problem or the phenomenon or the opportunity. We're collecting data that's not in the form of numbers, typically transcripts of words through interviews, so conversations with people in personal interviews or focus groups, transcribing those recorded interviews into pages of words forms most of the data that we see in qualitative research in general. We're going to a great depth of discussion in a conversation with individuals, and the richness of the data, the depth of the data means that we can only undertake a small sample. This is not a representative sample of the wider population, so we can't generalize the findings to the wider population of interest, but we're going down into a much greater depth of discussion than is possible from a large sample of using a survey, for example. So the findings that we have are subjective to the interpretation of the researcher. So whereas in quantitative research with a quantitative data set, if we all undertake, as we will in this unit, if we all undertake the same data analyses on the same data set, we should all get the same results. But with qualitative research, we don't have those sorts of tools. It comes down to interpreting the words on that transcript. And so different readers will come up with different interpretations of that. So as I say, in market research, it's very, very valuable before going out with a large-scale questionnaire to have a qualitative stage that will inform the quantitative research stage. Often, for example, there might be studies that we've found in the literature that have been undertaken overseas about a particular phenomenon, but that doesn't necessarily apply in terms of the results in our setting in our part of the world. So qualitative research, even when we've got methods from the literature that we can borrow or secondary data we can use from other parts of the world, a qualitative exploratory research stage is really valuable in helping us to understand any nuances that might be applicable in terms of our target market. Helps us to gain a much more in-depth understanding before we undertake the quantitative stage. But of course, qualitative research is undertaken as research in its own right, and there are market research firms that will only conduct qualitative research. Qualitative research is used to generate theory, so we wouldn't use a questionnaire to develop theory. Qualitative researchers generate theory from in-depth discussions and observation. We come up with new ideas. It's possible to screen alternatives through focus groups if we've got a range of different TV commercials or brand packaging ideas that we want to get some feedback on. Qualitative stages is very practical for that. Or we can sometimes use qualitative research after conducting a large-scale questionnaire because it enables us to bring in a group of people, say in a focus group setting, and discuss with them some of the findings from our questionnaire that we might not have expected initially. So a qualitative research can be research in its own right to test new brand slogans or television commercials. It can be undertaken prior to developing a questionnaire. It can help us understand what items we need to put in our questionnaire, or it can be undertaken after the questionnaire data analysis is complete and we want to get some more information about some of those survey results. So the key methods that we talk about in the two lectures in weeks 4 and 5 are observation, focus groups, personal interviews, which is where we use the repertory test, content analysis of secondary data, and ethnography. Participant in observation, interviews and audits would generally be the 3 main areas of research approaches when we're undertaking exploratory research. So as we discussed in the week 3 lecture, secondary data is particularly useful first port of call when we're starting a research project. Secondary data is data that has already been collected for a purpose other than our current project. So it may exist on social media, secondary data in the form of comments that have been made by people on social media that we can go and explore, or it could be something like a content analysis of historical documents such as newspapers about a particular topic. And in the academic literature, we go to secondary data to find out how other people have approached the research problem or the construct that we are interested in. So secondary data can be a valuable source of ideas for a larger quantitative stage. So in assessment 1, we're requiring you to comment on the suitability of using the repertory test to complete one of your research objectives. Your second research objective can then relate to any other qualitative technique that you feel is relevant for the problem at hand. This assignment doesn't have a lot of space for you to go into a lot of detail. Essentially, we're asking you to demonstrate your understanding of the purpose of the technique so that we can see that yes, you've got a very clear understanding of the rationale for using the repertory test to achieve an objective in this particular case. We would like you to demonstrate reading from the literature, so you need to have some references to your discussion about the repertory test, other than the lecture notes and other than Pike's papers. So we're looking for reading beyond the lecture notes and any journal articles of mine. So at this point, I would just suggest that you pause the recording and think about your responses to these 3 questions about the repertory test in terms of assessment 1 discussion. Now, one of the benefits, as I see it, of the repertory test in terms of qualitative research is it's really valuable for us in understanding how people differentiate a set of competing brands, for example, for any particular product category. It's very efficient in that we use a structured approach. Now, most qualitative research methods, focus groups and personal interviews, use unstructured methods. That is where they will start with a series of structured questions, but then they let the discussion go in any direction that becomes of interest from the participant. So we're open to going where the participant wants to discuss. With the repertory test, it's asking a series of questions that repeat the same structure. So what this results in is a very succinct set of responses from participants. So in a focus group or a personal interview where you end up with pages and pages and pages of transcripts of the discussion, with the repertory test, we get very structured, short responses. So the data analysis or interpretation is very straightforward and we don't end up with a mass of data. It's very easy for other people to follow the logic of our interpretation. The triad card method means that we are presenting a series of objects 3 at a time. So whatever the brand product category that we're interested in, we want to know how people differentiate between these when they're choosing making a particular purchase decision or thinking about a particular purchase decision. So if it was in the case of universities, for example, we would be presenting the names of 3 different universities at a time from a pool of around about 9, and we ask the same structured question each time. So that is, in what important way are 2 of these alike but different to the third? And their response in terms of the important way that they see them as being different or similar is representative of a potential attribute that we're interested in. In terms of sampling, how many people we would aim to interview in qualitative research, there's no set rule. We are looking for a small sample. The rule generally for most qualitative research is we sample until we reach the point of data redundancy. So that is by interviewing any new people, we don't get any new information other than that's repeating what we've had from the people before them. So that might occur after 10 interviews, it might occur after 15 or 20 or 25 interviews. At the start of a project, we don't always know when that point of data redundancy will be reached. So it's important when you're talking about a particular sample size that you give a reference from the literature to support your suggestion of how many people we should interview. So now I'd suggest that you pause the recording again and reread the Surf's Up case. And then in the classroom, we would ask everyone to work together in groups to discuss what their feeling is on the MDP. We'd then have a class discussion on that, then go back to the groups, get them to think about what the marketing research question is, and so forth. So this case is a real world research example undertaken by colleagues of mine at another university. They did have a surfing school come to them and ask for help, because what they were observing was lots of Chinese visitors coming in busloads to their beach where they were located, but none of them were staying very long. They were only staying for 15, 20 minutes, taking lots of photos, but they weren't setting up a towel on the beach or going for a swim or coming and inquiring about the surfing school. So the business recognized that this looked like an opportunity with lots of visitors from China coming to their particular beach, but there didn't seem to be a lot of interest from those visitors. So the management decision problem in this case would be something along the lines of, should the surfing school enter the China market, or how can we attract Chinese visitors? That was a practical problem faced by this particular business. So now I suggest you pause and think about, from this, what information would we need to address that problem? So what would the marketing research question be worded as? So the market research question in this case was, what are Chinese international students' perceptions of the beach and surfing experiences? The construct of interest is perceptions. It's also referred to by some researchers as image or attitude. And so if this was a construct you were using in one of our assessments, we'd ask you to go to the literature and find a definition of that construct, because that will then help us understand your rationale for how you're going to measure that. Now, if you go back to the case on CQ University in week 2, we were also interested in perceptions of CQU campus, but we were also interested in perceptions of the competing higher education institutes as well. So it was more than just looking at perceptions of CQU, it was looking at how they were positioned as a brand in the marketplace. So the construct of interest was broader than just perceptions, it was market position or differentiation. So in this case, the researchers wanted to find out what these Chinese visitors' perceptions were of the beach and the surf experience that they were visiting. So in terms of how the repertory test could be applied, fairly simple approach of presenting triads, so groups of 3 of different types of attractions and activities that are available in the Sunshine Coast area. So presenting to these students different types of attractions and asking, which would involve some beach experiences, some possibly theme park, other types of attractions, to get them to tell us in their words how they differentiate between these different experiences. Their responses would be along the lines of words such as safe, inexpensive, good service, adventurous, scary, for example. We could then use these to develop a questionnaire to get them to rate the surfing beach experience in terms of those attributes that they feel are important. But if that was for assessment 1, we wouldn't be using a questionnaire because we're only interested in qualitative research. So the qualitative use of the repertory test would be valuable by using triads to identify what are the attributes of tourism experiences that are important to Chinese visitors. Other qualitative approaches that could be useful, 2 in particular, one could be focus groups, because often some groups of people might be more comfortable talking about these experiences as a group rather than individually. So we can have a group discussion and brainstorm their ideas on why the surf experience is or isn't attractive, and in particular why they're not partaking in that particular experience at the moment. Another qualitative technique that would be really valuable is having Mandarin language speakers observing these visitors to the beach. So the visitors wouldn't know that they're being observed. They're not being asked to participate in any research. So we would be observing them in their natural environment. So in terms of the first assessment, we're open to ideas in terms of qualitative approaches for the case. Thank you.